I pulled the top 5 biggest markets from 5 years ago and compared them to the second half of 25, just to illustrate the point in terms of what has changed and maybe what hasn't changed. So the top 5 markets from 5 years ago was Northern Virginia. This is the largest data center market in the entire world, followed by Dallas, Fort Worth. Then we had Silicon Valley out on the West Coast in California, followed by Chicago and Phoenix. The biggest shift today in the second half of 2025 isn't that it's Northern Virginia as the number 1 market. It's the number 2 spot was previously in 7th place back in 2020, and that's Atlanta, Georgia, which is fascinating. So Atlanta, Georgia, Georgia Power benefiting from state tax incentives, benefiting from low cost of power, a lot of nuclear and natural gas resources in terms of keeping that fuel cost low for developers and occupiers in Atlanta, and robust connectivity in Atlanta going all the way up to Northern Virginia and then all the way across to Dallas, Fort Worth, being sort of the epicenter of the mid-Atlantic area. I think what isn't on the list are these new tertiary states in which we're seeing sites go to the power instead of bringing the power to the site. So Reno, Nevada is now competing with Silicon Valley, which 5 years ago didn't exist because of low cost of power, low cost of land, high available land for development, as well as state tax incentives to compete with California. So Reno, Nevada popped up, which did not exist in terms of significant size 5 years ago. You're also seeing in the Southeast, a state like Louisiana, which was not a data center market 5 years ago by any means or stretch of the imagination. And now there's plenty of announcements and development plans in Louisiana. And then a shout out to the PJM territory, most notably Pennsylvania, Ohio, parts of Virginia, as well as Indiana and parts of Illinois in PJM. And the reason I reference PJM is because it's a deregulated electricity market in which if you're an independent power producer of electricity, you can bring electrons onto the grid in a streamlined and more fast dynamic oftentimes than if you're in a regulated electricity market. So when path to power is key, those are the states and the regions that we have a keen eye on.
And that deregulated power market, I think, is one of the reasons why we chose it as one of the examples to look through when we're looking at the LandGate data. And this is just going to be 2 different examples, a low capacity example and a high capacity example, showing one in a constrained market where there's no headroom and in terms of offtake for what would be expected in a 2027 summer peak. And this is in the PJM territory in Pennsylvania. And then you compare that with another substation in West PA with right much offtake capacity, as you can see here, in that same 2027 summer peak. So that power deregulation is really taking forth in the market in real time at the ground level.
Yeah, because we are power constrained, everyone's solving for power. Not to say that that will exist forever, but that is what everyone's trying to solve today.
Absolutely. And while that is kind of the top of mind and the main constraint, and that migration is kind of helping temporarily, do you see this being a long-term solution for these power constraints?
I think we're seeing creative solutions. What are other paths forward in the next 10 years? And so bridging solutions are being considered in terms of bringing on small modular reactors. These are smaller nuclear generation sites. And we're seeing some creative approaches in terms of geothermal technology, which I did not think could exist at scale. There's some announcements out in Nevada in terms of geothermal. That's 24/7 firm power that data centers desire. So I think the behind the meter, the bring your own power solutions are being introduced and being pursued when there's grid interconnection delays that are pushing out to 2035 and beyond. I still am seeing amongst developers and amongst occupiers a priority for grid interconnection. But in the interim, if you're able to bring on some power while you're waiting 10 years for that formal grid interconnection, that's certainly a path we're seeing as well in some grid constrained markets.